Okay, I started, I think, where maybe some of you are right now and not knowing what to do at all and not understanding online learning and just having to research and learn and try different things out. I have, for the last 3 years, taught courses with the Division of Adult Learning. I have written and developed 3 courses, which I teach, and then I teach other ones as well. It's been a learning experience, and it changes and morphs as we go, and I'm always learning something. Every course that I do to try to make the next one better. But I'll just share with you just some of the things that I've learned and kind of how I apply it. Okay, so the first thing I would be, and this is, I know my audience in my classroom, but it's a different audience when you get them online. Even if it's the same students that are in your classroom, they are different online than they might be when you're just standing up in front of them in a classroom. So for me, one of the big things about how students were different when I started helping out the Division of Adult Learning is that they are not the regular 18 to 22-year-old. So there are different ages in there at different points in life. And so they will access and interact at certain times during the day, certain times during the night, and they interact in different ways, and it's not a set time every time you go on. So for me, that interaction with them was interesting because I would interact with some students during the day, some students during the night, and then I would have set times where we would interact with one another. And it's just seeing differences of people, whereas in the classroom, my students, I see them Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every day at 10, and they're pretty much the same. And we kind of go through the motions. So that is a little different in terms of the students. And I think that would apply to students who might take an online course during the summer. They're going to be probably working full-time or maybe doing whatever they do. And so the online is, I guess, gives them a great opportunity to continue on with their studies, but it can fit in with the rest of their schedule and their responsibilities and what they have going on. I think in knowing your audience too, the way you teach and the way you evaluate has to change somewhat. For online learning, you just can't be a talking head. It's hard to capture someone if they're just sitting there in front of their computer screen and you're talking to them, maybe a video of your lecture. Not that you can't do that, but that couldn't be the only thing that you depend on. So your teaching has to change up, and you have to offer different ways to communicate with the students and then different ways to evaluate them. And one thing that I have learned is, and I think this would go for our students in the classroom here too, but they are, this generation and students right now, they're always plugged in. So while they might be doing their class online, they're also checking their Instagram or Facebook on their phone, and they've probably got music going and the TV as well, so they're multitasking. So in trying to figure out how can I compete with that to get them very engaged for the time that I have them engaged. And so that's one of the things about the audience. In building the course, I found that you have to provide extra detail. You kind of have to go that next step in your syllabus and all your directions and everything that you give them, because you don't have the come knock at your door and, hey, let's just go over this, or what did this mean? I'm not sure I understand, because in this process you can do that, but they would send you an email and you send them an email back, and it can kind of drag out. So I think that the extra detail that you can provide in whatever you're offering in your course is a good idea when you're building it. For the DAL classes, they're 8 weeks long. So in beginning to end of that unit for the DAL, they're very consistent, and I really like that in terms of the structure. So it's like you have a week's amount of time to get done what you need to do, and you can break that over 8 sections, but I think it's real important to have consistency where they're doing the same order of things and they know what to expect as they plan, because there are a lot of students that like to work ahead if you give them that option, if you've opened up the course. And so some might do 2 units worth at the same time and then be revisiting in the threaded discussions, but they're getting the assignments done. Other students are just kind of with you, and then some of you kind of have to pull along behind you to catch up. I think it's also good to provide various types of evaluation when you develop your course. You do this in your classroom already. but I think it's important to do that online as well. I have found, you can do exams, you can do quizzes, you can do papers, threaded discussions. There's so many points at which you can evaluate, and I think that lets certain students shine in certain areas. So maybe if they're not as strong in one area, they can balance that in another area. So I try to provide lots of evaluation points throughout a week. So we'll start with, in terms of the threaded discussions in building the course, I try to base those on the reading. And so whatever text I'm requiring, I have already pre-written questions that I would like for them to discuss with each other based upon what they're reading, but then I'll also make them responsible for posting a question about the reading to ask everyone else. So it continues that dialogue. So I think that that way you're evaluating really how well they understand, how well they can communicate, and in some ways their level of critical thinking about what they're reading and interacting with the course. Another way that I provide in evaluation besides threaded discussion is they will take weekly quizzes. And for me, I found that works better than waiting a few weeks and doing an exam or maybe a midterm and an exam. So having a quiz every week, shorter pieces of information. I also have a faith integration paper that they have to write every week where they're integrating what we're learning with their faith. And this has been so interesting for me in terms of the student audience over the Division of Adult Learning, because I've had a lot of ministers and people studying to get information about counseling or moms or social workers, just different people in different walks of life. And so when they come into that faith integration piece, that's really interesting for me, and I've really grown a lot and I've learned a lot. So I like that piece of the assessment that I use in the course. I also have them, and this would be the next one, engaging on multiple levels. They have to engage with certain media points every week. And so I give them those links, I set those up for them, and they complement the course content that we're doing, but they're watching these media links, and then they have to write papers based upon what they've watched and how it has either supported what we've been learning or does not support what we've been learning in terms of research. And there's so much great stuff out there that you can use in terms of those multiple levels. And so there's just several different evaluation points along as you go. Also in building the course, at the beginning I include, and this is pretty standard format in terms of the master course outlines for the DAL, but there is a devotion every week, and so I've written those devotions to complement also the content areas that we're studying each week, so that starts the conversation a little bit and models for them the way to integrate, I guess, what they're believing spiritually and just in Scripture along with what we're studying. And then I provide, after the devotion, I do a short lecture, and that lecture is written. And at certain points along the 8 weeks, I'll also do a video. I don't do it every week, but I drop it in along the way. So I have a short mini lecture that they're reading. I also attach a PowerPoint, so that's a visual that matches the lecture. So as they're going through or listening or watching, that's another point. So just trying to put all those layers in to provide, make sure everybody is addressed and all needs. And pulling together the content when you're building the course, I think the first thing that I would say, and what I've really learned, is that it has to be visual. So important to be visual, I think. And so not only, and I'm terrible at this, I was telling Michael, I'm the worst at creating PowerPoints and making them really interesting and finding cool backgrounds, and that's something I need to work on. But I think making the PowerPoints very visual and all the media that you would use would be very important. Fill the gaps. I've learned to do this because in the regular classroom, it's a longer period of time, and you can go back and review or if this question comes up, you take care of it the next day. Because of the time frame that online is booked on, that 8 weeks, you don't always have that time. So I try to make sure that I fill in what I have been able to identify as perhaps some gaps. Maybe this is an issue that might require a little more reflection or a little more interaction. So I try to pull media into those places. So they're watching, like they'll watch news clips of the latest research in a certain area. They'll watch a documentary. Just different forms of that media to help fill in the gaps, perhaps if it's not something that I covered, and sometimes that brings up questions that are really interesting to talk about in terms of the class. Keep it current. This is an issue. YouTube is just notorious for posting something and then just pulling it off. It's gone, and they don't tell you. So oftentimes you find these great films or little short vignettes or whatever you want to show, and you link it, and then they go to, and it doesn't work, and it's not there. And then you're getting all that, I can't find the link, it doesn't work. So I think that's a burden of responsibility is on you as the instructor to make sure that your links are working. So go in and check those prior to entering that unit, because that's happened to me on many occasions, and that's not fun. And then you're scrambling trying to find. So I've also, no matter whichever one I use and I put as a link, I've always got a plan B, so it's really easy for me to go and grab it in case this one is down, so that I'm not scrambling, spending hours looking on YouTube or some other media site for something to show them. Establishing community, I think, is critical and very important in online learning. You establish community in your classroom, but we are aided, I think, in a certain sense, because our students are interacting with each other on multiple occasions outside of the classroom, and instructors, we have multiple opportunities to interact with them in different situations, different days, different places. And so I think you have to work really hard at establishing that sense of community in the online classroom. And it can be done, and it can be done very well. It just looks different than it would look in the regular on-campus classroom. So I believe the best place to establish this sense of community is in your threaded discussions. So at the beginning, everybody's first post is telling us about them. And it's interesting, they learn each other and they know each other as they go along. So you can tell when it's like if it's the first time you've had them in class, they've often been together in lots of other classes. And so they are just talking back and forth, chatting back and forth like they know each other really well in terms of online. So you dive into that conversation and just really investing and spending time answering every student, commenting to every student. It's really important because when you don't, in the classroom, you can make eye contact, or you can address everyone in the room or catch them when they're walking out or when they're coming in, and you don't really have that in the online. So I think you have to work harder to connect with each one of them. And this is a really, I think, easy and fun way to do it, is to just interact with them in terms of the threaded discussion and provide positive feedback, but then redirect some things and just build up that idea of community. So that's the next part where you actually have to model whatever kind of engagement you want. You have to model that. So if you want them to be on talking to each other frequently, then you need to be on and talking to them frequently, because they will quickly get the sense of you're not as engaged in the course as they are. And certainly we all know there are ways that even our students in class can check out. So I think that modeling how you want them to be engaged, and even how you want them to respond to questions, and ways in which to think, and ways in which to ask questions. So spending a good amount of time, at least in the first few weeks, doing that for them, so they're learning and they recognize what it's going to require and the commitment they have to make. The third part in community, and this is, I love this part too, is recognizing the diversity in the students that you have, but also helping them to recognize the diversity in each other in terms of where they've been. Because I think I find out in terms of the online, I guess because it's smaller and we're talking more, I actually find out a lot more about these students sometimes than I do the students I have in the regular classroom. Some of the classes I teach are just so large, 60 plus sometimes 90 people, and so it's hard for me to have that one-on-one contact with each one of them. And so this has been really rewarding for me to do the online because I get that kind of engagement, and I really enjoyed that. So diversity in views, and it's interesting because students can come to your class every day and do the activities and sit for the test, but they're not always required to participate where everyone hears their voice and knows how they're processing. And so there's a great deal of responsibility, I think, on the online student to do that, because that's how it works. So you learn them more, and I think they grow. They grow a lot in having to interact on this level. I understand that. I think you invest so much time in the regular classroom, but you're going to invest a lot of time in the online classroom. I think there's this idea that because it's online and maybe it's 8 weeks, oh, that's easy, that's a breeze, that won't require much. I've found that it requires more of me in many ways than being in the regular classroom. So it's not for the faint of heart. I think it takes a lot longer to develop a course than you might think. Because however you might do it in the classroom, it won't translate to how you do it online. You just have to do so much more preparation and building materials for the students to interact with, I think, than you do in the regular classroom. So it does take longer to build the course, and in terms of a time commitment, time of day is relative. For them, when they're on and posting, it might be 3 o'clock in the morning. So they're going to access class at different times. You can require them to be on at certain times, but then other times they'll be on and I may not be on. So I've gotten to where I'll check in the morning, I'll check in the afternoon, I'll check in the evening, so I'm staying current. I want them to stay current and not feel like they can check out for 3 or 4 days and then get on and post everything that they need to post. Being committed to check in on a daily basis several times a day, I think, is important. Finding the sweet spot, I talk about this a lot, and I think it really applies to online learning. You can give them too much to do thinking you've got to keep them busy, because surely online doesn't provide enough for them to do. So you can create, and a lot of hoops to jump through, and you can really overwhelm them very quickly, and it will be much easier for them to do just what they need to do to get by. So not giving them too much, but not giving them enough. And so finding that spot in terms of engagement, how that would shift over the 8 weeks, and the responsibility and accountability on the student increases over that 8 weeks. So there's more on me at the beginning, and then there's more on them as we move towards the end. So finding that balance, I think, and finding that balance too with your schedule, and balancing that within the classroom and your family and all the other responsibilities we have outside of school. That requires some thinking, and I think some planning, and it's just really by trial and error. I have taught classes in the last 3 years where I didn't provide enough, and I'm scrambling because this is not working, or I have provided too much. So just finding where that is at. And I think you have to teach a course more than one time to know where that's at. And you have to teach the same course more than one time, I think, to make sure that your content is there and it's working as it should. The last thing about investing your time is going to be invested in a more I think, efficient and rewarding way if you ask for help. And I know that the Division of Adult Learning has master course outlines, and they have tech help and all of that, but I am not a tech person. And so knowing getting in, there might be some kind of emergency, and I wouldn't know how to handle it, so knowing who to go to ask for help. And I think this session right here is really wonderful in terms of learning from other people who are doing it. And I think the DAL model for online is possibly going to be quite different than, say, a 4-week online course this summer, like Brian's thinking about doing. So that it's just a different way to develop the course, and you'll have to approach it differently. Yes.
SACS requires seat time. So when we take students on trips, there's a certain amount of seat time we have to have. All of our course calendar shows a certain amount of seat time. How does that work with these kinds of courses?
Well, there's an estimated time that they are engaged, and you can measure that a lot, because on Moodle, you can see when they're on and when they're not. So you can see when they check in, you can see how long they're there, how active they are engaging with all the different steps. So that's how That's how I monitor it and make sure they're there. And if they're not there, then I'm hey, missed you, hey, you need to, on it very quickly, to keep them involved. Yeah.
Also, DAL has a formula for how long it
Yes.
takes to read 20 pages of
Right.
academic text. And so when you assign stuff, they sort of have a formula for how long that is supposed to take.
Mhm.
And they have to show, what, 150 hours?
150, I think that's right, yeah.
150 hours
Yeah.
for 3 hours credit.
Yeah,
So when you design a class for them, you have to specifically.
right. Like they're going to spend so much time.
Yeah, for each
Right.
unit, I think.
Right.
This will be this many hours, and
Right.
put it all together.
So it'll take you this long to watch this media clip and then respond, estimate. It'll take you this long to read these chapters, this long to do this discussion or take this quiz, yeah.
Are your courses undergraduate courses or grad or both?
Mine are undergrad.
Mine are undergraduate.
Okay. Is there a different formula for calculating those kinds of things for grad courses than undergrad, do you know?
I don't, there should be, but I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just add additional assignment.
We've done those charts for all the grad programs, so Lisa Long has done it for the master's. But
Right,
that's the only
that's right,
grad
yeah.
program that's fully online, but she would know how to do that for sure.
We should double check that. I suppose if you're using the formula for readings, and I imagine the grad readings are going to be so much more
Yeah, they'll
in-depth
be
than
more.
our undergrad text.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done a hybrid course where you have them meet on campus like once or twice during the semester while in conjunction? Or?
I did a course where I went to Charlotte, to the Charlotte Center, and had like an intensive weekend, right, dropped in the middle of those 8 weeks, so. But in terms of several times in here on site, no, I have not.
The way I was going to talk about the online classes is to look at this different direction, and some of it is from the how do we get this, some of our information physically moved to the online world, because so many of us create our lectures and our PowerPoint for being in the classroom. And I know when I do my PowerPoints, they're really not that full of information. There is information on there, but if there's a slide, I might talk about it for 5, 10, 15 minutes sometimes, because it prompts my memory about what comes next, but it's not the information. So taking that PowerPoint and putting it online for the students does very little. It gives them a sentence they can memorize for a test, but no understanding about it. So over the last few years, I have been investigating, and I should say being guided through investigation, because Michael Sturgeon started probably 6 or 7 years ago working with me on this whole idea of being able to record some of your lectures and being able to put them online. So I was going to talk about that a little bit, and being able to take some of your material and put it online. And in general, I found the 4 things that lectures are the biggest thing that I have to consider about the online classes. And I think we've talked about assignments with Susan Carter, being very careful and aware that you have assignments that are appropriate. I'll mention calendars at the end and about students submitting their work. But for me, the lectures is kind of the big piece of what do you do for lectures. The first thing that I tried is Jing. And Jing is free software, and you can download this on any computer, Mac or PC, and record a 5-minute lecture. Now, the problem is with this 5-minute lecture, this program's free for a reason. It's to get you hooked. It's a gateway video program. So they get you hooked that you can record this, but then you go, oh, if only I could edit it, or if only I could do 10 minutes. So if you want to do a little bit longer, then you go to next step up, which you have to pay a little bit for, and eventually they may get you hooked on Camtasia or something, which is a much more expensive program, but kind of worth it probably. So with the Jing, you record 5 minutes, and you don't get to stop and start. It's 5 minutes. So you hit record and you keep talking until either you hit 5 minutes and it will cut you off, or you stop it earlier and it will save a file for you. You can do a a video you can shoot. If you want to shoot yourself lecturing, you can, or it can be a PowerPoint that you have it's recording your voice while you show the PowerPoint. Either way is fine. It doesn't put it in a form that you can put this onto YouTube, however, and some students do have some difficulties viewing these files. They're called SWF files, and some students have trouble with it. Technically, you should be able to get around it. If you're in Firefox, if you just have this little, well, it should be an MP3 or MP4, but it's actually this SWF. If you just drag it into your menu bar, like where you would put www.whatever.com, if you drag this little file up there, a Swift file will play in a window, which was cool. I didn't know that for a long time, but finally found out when my students were complaining. It's like, okay, just grab this from Moodle, drag it up to your menu bar, and it will play. And it works, but sometimes it's hard to explain these things to students. So it's good, but it's not great. Camtasia Studio, I ended up paying for Camtasia because I like it. It is fairly easy to use video program where I can make all the edits I want. I can work with the audio to get it how I want. I can change focus in areas, kind of where the camera is on the video to change what it's going to, and I really like it. It's about $30 a month, but I use it for a lot of things, so it made sense for me. I'm communication, so I get to just mentally, I can say this is an appropriate use of my discretionary income because I like it. And it works nicely. And something like Camtasia goes onto YouTube really easily. You can also record PowerPoint. So I don't know how many people know how easy it is to take just a basic PowerPoint and record the narration and post this. Let me just show you though how easy it is to do this recording of a lecture. So let's say I'm going to record this right now. I wanted to record what we're talking about now. I just click on slideshow up here, and there's this little thing with a stopwatch that says record slideshow. I'm going to always say play narration, so if I record this, it will record my voice. When I do this on my Mac, or I have this laptop here, I just press record, and I can start recording from a current slide. And until I want to start recording now, and I'll just say, and here we are now going to speak about lectures and the 3 different ways that we can present our lectures on videos. When I'm done, I can hit X, and it will ask me if I want to keep that 13-second recording. I can say, yes, I do. But it will be a sound file there that if you have a microphone then, and it does record, it will play automatically. So when a student opens this up, it will play that narration as soon as you go on to it. And there'll be a little icon, so also you can, they can play it again if they want to. So they can just hit the little not the microphone, but the speaker, and do it again. You can do really quick videos with this, where you can just discuss your lecture, and you can do a little piece at a time. You don't have to do an hour where you sit down for an hour and record the whole thing. I can record a slide, I can stop it, and I can come back later and record more to it. So it does work out nicely to have that YouTube channel that I wanted to show you. I have a YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is DocMo is, and DocMo is at YouTube and yeah, at gmail.com is an address, but I have for different classes. So I have a online public speaking class that I use, and so for here I'll have the video that I've used, that I've created, and they're great PowerPoint templates you can get for free that will do these little animated things that everyone dreams of taking. Just a narration. Not, but it's a great class. See, it's a great class. You ought to take it, online public speaking. They're not long. It's usually 20. Sometimes there's a 30-minute video, but they're not very long that we do. And I love that. It works out really well to be able to have this. I also have an online Understanding Human Communication class that I do. And this one, I have YouTube videos. I also have some prezzies that I recorded narration to and just embedded the narration there. And as they do a prezzie, they can go through it. And I do a flipped classroom. I do one flipped classroom, but I'm not real fond of it, where we do part of it online and part of it on campus. I find I have a very hard time ensuring that they've really watched the flipped part of it before they come to class, because it's predicated on this idea that they watched all the lectures online ahead of time and they come to class ready to do an active exercise to use the information. And it's frustrating because if they haven't, the exercise makes no sense. And I have had trouble with that working well. So some different things. Also, what can be nice though on this particular channel, Interpersonal Comm, I don't usually offer this online, but I had a student who was they were injured and out of class for a few weeks, and I didn't have time to record, but I was aware of a lecture series that Gottman from, he's a psychologist, and he does some work with relationships, and we were talking about relationships at this point. And so I gave her a link to many of the things that we're talking about, because we used one of his books in class and we were at that section. So I had her watch some of the lectures here, which was nice. I find the YouTube channel very useful. I have students sometimes post when I do public speaking. They will post their videos on here as well, but I will set them to private. So the only people who can see the private are either me or anyone else who has the link that I've given them. Nobody else can get to the student videos, but those who have the link, which would be the people in the class. So they can watch each other's speeches then and do critiques, which they have to do, just like they would in a real life public speaking class. So I enjoy having the YouTube channel. It's been really useful. Assignments, a couple things that I have just discovered. I end up PDFing just about everything, because I have had students, if I put a Word document out there, darn if somebody won't alter it and say, well, this is what I had. Maybe it is, maybe it was altered, and sometimes there are ways where somebody will do something, put it back, and it's one student who attached it somehow, but another student gets that one, and so it's not always the original student who did the altering. We get this sometimes in Portico with documents that we share as a faculty member. It's always funny when I go to Global Perspectives site and I'm going to get kind of the clean new version of the budget, and almost always a faculty member has saved their budget on there. So I just got one recently. And I think it was actually Delafranco's budget that was on there instead of, and I don't know, somebody had evidently uploaded. They didn't realize that they've got a clean one somehow, and they saved a personal one on there. And it happens. It does happen. So I PDF everything so things can't be changed and you don't get those kind of problems. I also have everything handy to email, because there's always going to be someone, it seems, that they can't open it. If it's their computer problem, I don't know. Is it an internet problem? I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I usually have them on a thumb drive, so wherever I am, I can get it to them. So if I'm not home at my computer and it's an online class, so I can go to somebody else's computer and just plug it in and send it to them, and it's easy. I find that preparation, because sometimes the students are a little demanding every now and then. Like, I know our on-campus students are never demanding, never. But just to give an example, one of the classes I taught recently, a gentleman who was probably similar in age to me, he was mid-40s, maybe early 50s. He had talked about how long he'd been in business. And he had his own business, and he did his homework late at night. And evidently, he posted somewhere after midnight, I'm sound asleep by midnight. And when I check my email at 8 o'clock, I've gotten about 5 emails. I have posted, I need feedback now. I'm going to be heading into work, and if I don't get the feedback now, I won't be able to do anything else. It's like, whoa, okay, all right. And I could sit down and do the feedback, but it had really surprised me the first time it happened that I need it now, because I have a really tight schedule, and sometimes the people do. So there's this level of flexibility that you mentioned that has to be there, or it won't work well if we don't kind of understand that there have to be flexibility and kind of being able to do different things. The calendars, it's really confusing, online classes. I don't have a great way to do this yet. I use the Moodle calendars, and I try to update and send them little emails, remember that this day such and such is due. Even so, it can get confusing, especially if you put a date on your assignment and then there's a date on the calendar and then something changes and you remember to change it one place but not the other. So I usually tell them that one place is the last word answer. So pay attention to the calendar, not necessarily what's on the document. If it's on the document, it's a different date. Feel free to ask me about it, but it may have changed. And you have the old version of it maybe saved from a week ago, and maybe it even has been updated, but you haven't downloaded the new version with the new date on it. Or sometimes we just forget. They have the assignment, you put it there at the beginning of the class, and we just forget that it had a date on it. So be really careful about that. The student submissions is the other thing that you have to think about. Moodle, certainly, they can submit things on Moodle, and this works well for most Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, some of the smaller things, anything larger. And there is a limit of how much Moodle can accept. And for something like public speaking, it will usually not be able to accept anything after their first introduction speech because they're too big a file. So I usually have to find an alternate means for them to be able to submit. Dropbox is a great thing to use. You can get, most people have free accounts if your students don't. Send out an invite to everyone on your list and you can get free space on a Dropbox. I got up to somewhere around 60 gig of free space on Dropbox by sending out free invites for my online classes. Now everyone has one, so I don't get any more free space. I finally had to pay for more to be able to have it, but it's great. It's real easy to use for a lot of people. And I also then have them upload things to YouTube, and that takes no space because then I can just click on the link that they give me if it's a video type thing that they're handing in, and that works really well for me also. So as I've been working with the classes I mentioned, I think kind of the lecture was my biggest thing that I had to work through of how do I get my lectures on there. And then some of these other things, looking at being able to set up a YouTube channel and then making sure that I had everything with me, being flexible at all times, and it was PDF'd, and have alternate ways for students to hand stuff in to me if it's too big for Moodle or email, because of course email doesn't take that much either. And those are some of the things that have helped me with setting up the online courses.
You said you use email on those?
I will at points. That's probably not the first choice email because things can get hidden in there. But for me, it seems like there's almost always somebody, I don't know why, but they can't figure out how to put something in Moodle. They can't attach it or drop and drag it, which it's not that hard. But there's something about their computer. I don't know if it's a setting that they have, but it doesn't work. And so I'll accept the email if they do it. And then if I do feedback, then in Moodle, of course, you can attach the feedback, and so I'll have the original paper document with the feedback on it. And I do that. I'm not sure if everyone does. Does that kind of standard, do you think? Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's that kind of flexibility factor to it.
In creating the online community that Susan was talking about, do either of you know any alternatives to using threaded discussions to do that?
I do use, at times, there is another site that I use. It's called Top Hat, TOPHAT. And with Top Hat, you can have the discussions, but it has some other options to it where they could respond to it, but they can also upvote or downvote, and we can do some tournaments with it as well, which can have some appeal to it, as well as certificates. If they hit a certain level of comments, then certificates can be sent out. I had a set for the public speaking in which that when they had a certain amount of things, they had like a certificate that they're a seedling, and then they went all the way up to a mighty oak at the final, for the final set of points that they had. So there are a few things that you can do. The competition part seemed to help them, and especially when I gave extra credit for the one, when we did discussions in one post that got the most thumbs up, the upvotes, they got extra credit, and so they liked giving better answers with that when we had that possibility, although some just, they're like, okay, I'm never going to win it, so never mind anyways. That happens. Or you do the questions that they can't do the rote answers. And that's generally, you try to do that, like, given, what's an example, why is it applying, what makes this either, how does this specifically engage whatever you're talking about? And so try to do that.
What is the range in enrollment in your classes from what to what for the size of courses?
So, public speaking, I had a real small one. I think we ended up with 6 in there. It was small, and I said, it was the first time I was doing that one here. So I just thought that was fine. I was happy to go with a small amount. My understanding human comment's not that big either, but I think there were 20 to 30, if I remember correctly, is what we're getting in those classes.
I think the most I've ever had is 17.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure if I've gotten over 20. I might not have gotten over 20. It is a lot of work with the keeping up with the comments. It seems like it should be easy and you're not lecturing all the time. And the setup for the first lectures, if you want to do that, if you have great, not handwritten notes, but if you have, full sentence, easy to understand lecture notes, those are certainly something that can be posted instead of, having a PowerPoint lecture, video kind of thing.
Have either of you tried using Skype where you can use multiple people at one time, or Google Hangout where you can have multiple people engaged at one time where you actually have conversations?
I have not done that with Skype or Google Hangouts. The Top Hat, you can have it at the same time. I haven't used that function, but that is something that you can do. And they can collaborate on something. For instance, if you load an image and they have, and they use an iPad, something where you can use a stylus or draw on, they can collaborate on that particular image together, as opposed to having these different things that they're working on. I haven't done it at the same time. I've let it all be asynchronous. I found it difficult to even the thought of trying to get people together. I've broached it once or twice in classes and never gotten a good response. Have you done that, or?
No, not with more than 2 or 3 at a time, but it wasn't for a course. But I just was wondering, just even maybe at the very beginning of the semester, just so they can have some sense of real time contact with somebody.
Yeah, it is. It would be great to do it with the smaller ones, like the public speaking. I did. It wasn't unusual for me to talk with somebody individually to confer. But when you get up to the 17, 18, 19, it's too much. Yeah.
Susan, you mentioned having them all together at one time. Have you done that? Or have you had them all sign on at the same time?
Yes, and I'm not always very successful, but yeah, I've had a group of them be on at the same time, but then you have to understand, this came up and I can't, and you'll get an email. So I have done that. I did that earlier on, but I do less of that now. It's just hard to coordinate with them in terms of just where they're at in life and their responsibilities and their
It's
working.
true. Yeah. Yeah, it is hard.
I was just going to say one thing about the flip lectures that you were doing. Yeah, done just a few things like that in a class here on campus, but we have them, I create just a brief quiz in Google Docs. So when they watch the lecture, then they have to respond to that and submit that before class, so that verifies then that they actually watched the lecture.
And if they get a 0 on it or something, do they still come in, or they don't bother coming that day?
This is with a grad class. They show up.
That wasn't a
They're there, so
concern.
it's not,
Okay.
we haven't had that happen yet. So.
Okay. I did find useful to be able to go into the logs of Moodle to really see what they're doing, because there will be times when somebody will say, well, I tried and I couldn't do it. And then I go to the backlog and I find out you were on for 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I don't think we call that a real try. There's obviously, or maybe you haven't even logged on for 2 weeks.
Right.
That not that you haven't even been to this particular page or chapter, but you haven't even logged on. And it's useful sometimes to be able to say this is exactly what's happening. And I have access to this information. It's not complicated to get to. Michael can show you that easily of how to get those things, to find out what they've actually been doing or not doing.
One thing I forgot to mention, and it may not apply to your courses like it would apply to mine, but some of the subject matter that I teach can be quite sensitive or maybe personal, so you have to keep a tight rein on what you allow in those conversations, or if someone is sharing too much personal information, that you would contact them separately and kind of walk through that with them. And so that's another reason why I think for me I have to be on consistently, because I could miss something like that and it could turn up not being so good. So
Yeah.
Did you make a comment about how you use Camtasia?
That's the same class that I was just mentioning, it's our intro to grad studies course, so it's just that introductory bibliography, and that's one that DeEtte and I team teach. So, we just have a short, they're just 5 to 6 minute screencasts on different topics related to, just a short one on this particular type of resource, or a short one on how to access a particular kind of particular type of information in the databases or something like that. And then those are the ones that we follow up with just that, like a 5-question Google quiz, just to make sure, because then when they come to class, they can just dig in and start working, and we can work individually with them in class then, and we're not having to
That's great,
do those rote kinds of things. But doing short pieces, I think, really helps too, and then they can go back and review anything that's been problematic.
Yeah.
If there is anything problematic.
Yeah, but it's good to be able to review the things. Sometimes they do. You weren't, it's been a while ago. You need to look at it again and see what were the major ideas.
I've also seen an example where somebody did longer screencasts, but then they had even student assistants that would take out, maybe there are 3 or 4 complex ideas that they addressed in that one. And a student would take one of those ideas and just do like a 5-minute real in-depth breakdown and kind of, putting it in their own terms, the way they learned it, or something like that, just a further expansion on it that would help break down the actual content.
Yeah, that's a nice idea too, yeah.
I haven't done that, but I've seen it done.
Yeah. It does take a little bit of time to set up the videos. I found for the first class that I did, this is going to sound awful, but I've gotten much better over the years. For an hour's worth of solid content that I would want to use year after year after year, took me about 7 hours probably to get that 1 hour that I was really happy with. And so if you teach a class a couple times, you get it down the first time, you just get something, and then you can start refining it the next times, because it can drive you crazy if you try to get it perfect the first time you do it. And I did try that, and it didn't work for one, but it was also really made me crazy, because it was during a semester and I was teaching a full load of classes, and that was on top of it, and it was an unreasonable use of time or expectation of what could happen with it. So now, first time through, make sure that the content is there, but it might not be pretty and flashy necessarily, and it might be more ums and uhs that eventually I'll edit out, or the random tangent. It might be there the first time.
yeah.
Later, it will be gone. Each time it's less. And then it's the keeping on top of it, which becomes much more fun when you don't have the other stuff that you have to do at the same time.